Welcome to the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev, where we explore and share experiences, stories, and lessons 7 days a week from across the games industry, helping you make the best game you can. Stay tuned for today's episode. Good morning, Overload Nation. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Dev Talk, talking to game developers from across the world to bring you experiences, stories, and lessons 7 days a week. Today, I'm joined with Daniel Fedor from Blue Bottle Games to talk about his latest game, Neo Scavenger. Daniel, tell us about yourself first and how you got into the games industry.
Okay. I'm a veteran of the AAA industry originally. I was in web design for a while and I really wanted to do games, so I joined BioWare in 2004. And I was there until about 2010, so just about 7 years when I quit. 2011. And then at that point, I was interested in getting into indie games because I wanted more creative control. So I resigned from my position there and started my own studio, Blue Bottle Games, and pretty much worked on Neo Scavenger from then until its launch. It was like a beta launch in early 2012, and then finally a full gold release in December of 2014.
Okay, well, that's quite a while for a game, isn't it? It's 2 or so years
Yeah,
in December of
more of the game was in
2014.
development in like an open beta than it was just me. So
Mm.
a lot of sort of tweaking with public feedback.
Oh yeah, that relates to a question later on. But yeah,
Okay.
feedback, that's very important. You say also BioWare since 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Have you worked on any big names at all
Yeah.
from BioWare?
Most of my time there, I was working on the Dragon Age franchise. So I joined just before. Um, Actually, they may have announced Dragon Age before I got there, but the Dragon Age Origins project was my main project while I was there, and I was a technical artist on that. And then a little bit of time spent on Dragon Age 2, but I was kind of looking for something smaller and more intimate than a big AAA game at that point. So I switched over to the Montreal team, where we were working on an unreleased and canceled project that was really more for the what do you call it, the social game uh, boom that happened a couple of years ago. And when that was canceled, it was in order for us to shore up the staffing requirements on Mass Effect 3, mostly the multiplayer component of that. So
Wow, so that's pretty cool. So did you join just after Jade Empire?
it was still ongoing when I joined, but it released shortly after I got there.
Aha, okay. Right, cool. So tell us about your studio then, Blue Bottle Games. You started it because you wanted more creative freedom, and how many people and what's the structure?
It is just me at the moment, so it's like a sole proprietorship, and I I've contracted a handful of people on Neo Scavenger. The complete list is in the game's credits, but basically, I wanted to do as much of it as I could on my own, and realized about a year into it that that wasn't going to happen. Uh,
Mm.
so the big contributions from outside my studio were the music by Josh Culler, the sound effects by Paul Sapo, um, the uh, the illustrations. There were probably about, I want to say, nine-ish that I contracted out for encounters, and then quite a lot of sort of community management and design feedback from a variety of people, and then writing um, from a couple different contractors for certain locations in the game. So it's, I guess, if you want to call it a one-man show with a contract help on the side.
Mm. Yeah, one man band. Yeah, that had the work outsourced.
Yeah,
That sounds pretty typical and pretty generic for small indie studios to be on your own and have contractors working.
Yeah, I think it's for me. I was at BioWare when they were acquired by EA, and one of the things that I discovered while both pre and post EA acquisition was that the cost of a full-time employee is one of the major costs of developing a project, and staffing can really drive up the cost of a project. So I was, I guess I say, allergic to the idea of having staff that I wasn't fully utilizing, and I certainly couldn't come up with enough work for another full-time employee throughout a whole game cycle. So I'm interested in sort of exploring the model of as few full-time employees as possible and contract sort of, art when you need the art, writing when you need the writing, QA when you need the QA, because they all kind of have high and low points of activity during the course of a game's development.
Hmm. Interesting. That makes sense, but I never knew. I don't know the data and the statistics of AAA studios and such, but I can understand that the staff salary would be the most expensive thing.
Yeah,
So,
this I was going to say the salary is actually about half of it. What they had was the fully loaded employee cost, which included things like the facilities, insurance, um,
hmm.
pension payments, the security, and things like that. So,
Hmm. So tell us about Neo Scavenger, Daniel, and what you wanted the player to experience.
okay, Neo Scavenger is um, the way I've always described it is if you took DayZ and you made it single player and turn based and removed the zombies and added a story to it. Or if you took the early game of Civilization, especially Civ 5 with the hex map, where you're kind of exploring the map and picking up resources before you've really got into the kind of nation building aspect. That's kind of how the map playstyle of Neo Scavenger feels. And it's in a post apocalyptic setting, somewhat inspired by IPs like the Rift's pen and paper role playing game, the Shadowrun role playing game, and several other, Fallout Stalker, and even as far back as Oregon Trail. The original design spec for the game was post-apocalyptic Oregon Trail, and it was even westward heading in its original version. But I wanted to kind of combine that setting, that feeling of the settings I previously mentioned, with pen and paper role playing game experience where you're being told a story by a GM, but then you're looking over your character sheet and you're saying, I have these skills, I have these pieces of equipment, I know these things, and here's how I'm going to wield those to direct where the story goes next. So I wanted it to feel like that. You had that kind of freedom.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, I can understand that. As regards that post-apocalyptic esque you were going for,
Mm,
that's pretty common and pretty popular
yeah.
these days. So, when it came to promoting the game, what strategies worked and what didn't work?
Um, I've actually been a fairly hands-off um, promoter of my own game, which flies against the common wisdom in the industry. I've always been sort of what's the word I'm looking for? The the hard sell has always turned me off in any arena, whether it's games or cars or whatever the product may be. I didn't like people telling me what I should like and what I shouldn't like. So I didn't want to have that kind of an advertising voice in the game. So it was a very kind of under the radar um, campaign, if you want to even call it a campaign. What I did do though was I sort of gently um, shaped discussion and awareness where I could, in a way that I thought was respectful to the community where it was being discussed or where it was being advertised. And more often than not, I would watch Google alerts to see where conversations were erupting about the game and sort of foster and grow those communities as they arrived. Um,
Hmm.
at the same time, trying to maintain my own forums and later on things like Steam forums and so on. So it's been a very kind of organic and soft sell, I would say, approach.
Organic and soft sell. Cool. So, how did you go about funding the game? Again, what worked and what didn't work so well?
It was self-funded. So back in 2011, I don't think Kickstarter had really taken off by that point. No Patreon or anything like that. Back then, the big deal was what they called flash game licensing. So you could build a flash game and then shop it around to sponsors, web portals, and so on, who would then pay you usually on the order of hundreds to a couple thousands of dollars to put the game exclusively on their website, or for a lesser amount of money, just to have the game on their site, even if it was elsewhere. So my original thought was I would save up enough money, I'd develop one of these web games, and then try and get it licensed enough to, kickstart whatever I did next. But as it turned out, around the time I should have been delivering my first game, I was starting to think maybe this needed to be a premium product. And at the same time, the flash game licensing community was starting to dwindle. So fortunately, I had saved up enough for about a year and a half ish of development time without any outside help. And I think if anyone were going to do indie development, I'd still recommend on the order of that or more, ideally, because it does take a while to kind of get your footing and release the game. So if you're going to do it yourself, I think it's the way to do it, because there's nobody really pounding you or over your shoulder or telling you what you should do with their money.
Yeah, I understand that. So, how did you go about QAing the game and getting feedback?
Well, initially, like I said earlier, it was a couple of months of development just with me, and I did have some friends and relatives play the game. So I got feedback from them, and a lot of that was more immediate user experience feedback, and a little bit of game design feedback. But once I released in paid beta, I started to get quite a bit more feedback. And then again, with early access, it was like another order of magnitude of feedback. So every time it reached a new audience, I got more and more feedback on the way the game was playing, errors in the game, general feel of the sound, the art, the writing. So it was, like I said earlier, more in development during public feedback than it was just on my own. And I would recommend anyone who has the opportunity to develop with public feedback do so, because I definitely think the game was better for it.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, because the players know what they want in the end. So, what was cut from the game and why?
A lot was cut from the game. I semi-jokingly say that I had a wish list of hundreds of items, but there really is a wish list of 100 items that were things that didn't make it into the game. Things as little as more variety in clothing or food types, all the way up to, like, at one point I was considering whether you'd be able to leave Michigan. But what I found was getting Michigan to feel less empty was such a monumental task. There was no way I'd be able to fill out, whole other areas. I still think Michigan feels pretty empty. People talk about how far it is between the major settlements that you find in the game, and there are no roads, for example. So it's quite a lot that I wasn't able to achieve, even though I wanted to.
So, what was the biggest thing you learned while working on the game?
I would say that it's hard to pinpoint one biggest thing. It is, for example, one big thing I learned is that launching a game is probably a 6-month process between when you think you're done and when you're actually done and actually available for sale. So that's something I think a lot of, at least for, I'll say, a premium game, not like a smaller mobile game or something. This is a PC launch, the QA period, the reviewing period, the contract writing, and so on. It's a lot more complicated. And I think, like many other people before who have started their own business, you do it to start having more creative freedom and more hands-on experience making games. And by the time you're ready to launch your first game, you're not getting a lot of that anymore. You're back on business administration, whether that's reviewing contracts again, or paying the bills, or issuing bills, or public relations is a huge part of my daily schedule. So in a way, I don't think I am getting a lot more time to work on games, which is the reason I started this company in the first place. But at least it's a little bit more control and responsibility than I had before.
Mm-hmm. I understand. So, what was the worst thing that happened, and how did you overcome it?
I don't know if there wasn't really a catastrophe that happened during the development, but there were points when I had to figure out what I was going to do about communities that were on the fence between supporting and deriding the game. I remember early on in the project, I got quite a lot of snickers. It's just a Flash game, and former BioWare, you know what that means, and yada yada. And I think places like that, they were willing to like the game, but they weren't going to give it the benefit of the doubt. And I definitely had to tread carefully there, so that I was being supportive, and ignoring any sort of harshness or negative feedback. And I guess that's probably one of the harder parts of it is you're always going to be under attack from someone, whether legitimate or not, and how you handle that is going to sort of determine the way the public perceives you. So I think those were some hard times, but I wouldn't say they were catastrophic.
I see. So I'm also then curious, what was the best game dev purchase you made? Whether it was a software license, a top quality piece of hardware or equipment, or simply a comfortable chair and a good desk?
Almost all of the above, but I don't know which one would be the best. I think the one that I got the most mileage out of, I didn't buy. It was actually just an open source interactive development environment, IDE, called Flash Develop. So originally I was writing Flash code in, I think, Flash Professional, and then basically doing all my editing on the timeline and stuff like that. One of my friends, I think it was Henry Smith, or maybe it was Phil Veal. Either way, one of them mentioned that Flash Develop was a great way to write code for Flash, because it kind of let you do everything you needed to do like Visual Studio would, and that was definitely it changed my productivity immensely. And in a way, I kind of paid for it later, because we did a humble bundle where the proceeds went to open source projects, like Flash Develop was one of them, and the Hacks project, and so on. So I like to think that I was able to contribute back somehow, but that was probably one of the bigger game changers for me. But definitely ergonomic desk, because you're sitting at it all the time. I bought a mechanical keyboard, and that was more of a pleasure purchase, but I really like it's a more satisfying experience to type. And I do think that my MacBook probably played a pretty large part in my development too. I develop on a PC desktop, but in order to get Mac and Linux tested, I needed hardware that would run those OSs, and my MacBook is kind of my three-way booting machine that is really good for testing markets I wouldn't have been able to test for before.
I get you. That's quite extensive as well. So, what game development related book, lecture, or learning resource can you recommend?
My go-to when it comes to game books has been Jesse Schell's The Art of Game Design. I think it's called A Series of Lenses is the subtitle. that is one of the few books that, upon finishing, I immediately started rereading because I enjoyed it that much and I felt like it had that much to offer. It is more of a game design book than it is a development book. But if you're interested in sort of broadening your understanding of mechanics and user experience and virtuous cycles of mechanics reinforcing other mechanics, it's a great book. It covers quite a lot of territory, and with just enough depth that you can launch off to do more serious research later. But yeah, my favorite for sure.
Oh, cool. I think that book is worth checking out.
Hmm.
So, like an Evernote or Trello, do you have a useful or productivity enhancing software, app, extension, or website worth sharing?
Let me think. The guy who did the sound effects for me, Paul Sapo, he developed a piece of software, or he was and still is developing a piece of software that runs on Atlassian and I think Jira. He calls it PCDMS, but it was basically an issue tracking web application. And as part of our collaboration, he asked if I could do my bug tracking and issue tracking through that software. So I'm interested to see where that goes. Like that was useful in getting my issues a little bit more depth than just done, not done, and alphabetical listing in Excel, which was my original tracking software. Apart from that, I don't know if there's any productivity software that I was using other than the aforementioned Flash Develop. But I wasn't doing a lot of team collaboration, having as few contractors as I did. That was mostly by email. So.
Mm-hmm. So, Daniel, what advice can you give to aspiring game developers, small indie studios, and people trying to get to where you are today?
Hmm. Well, there are a lot of roads in, and I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I definitely feel like my experience in AAA prepared me for, well, it doesn't even have to be AAA, just my experience working for another studio for a series of years definitely informed my later development as an indie. I started to understand how things fit together, both technically and in terms of management and business. Um, I was accidentally a producer at the end of my tenure at BioWare, and that was a huge learning experience, but I think also a benefit to running my own business later as an indie. Not everyone's going to have that opportunity, but you end up dealing with a lot of things as a producer that are very directly applicable to running your own business as an indie, as well as just managing your product in terms of features and requirements. And yeah, as I said earlier, if you're going to go it alone, a couple months of savings is not going to do it. You need to know how much you're going to cost per month to not have a job. So whether that means you're spending $3,000 a month, $1,000, whatever, figure out how much it costs you to live for a month, and then plan on probably on the order of 18 to 24 months in order for your first product to get out that's actually earning you revenue, because your first one may not. Despite Neo Scavenger being the first and earning me revenue, that was not the expectation. So.
Mm-hmm. I get you. I understand a lot. So, what is next for you, and what's the best way to contact you?
Well, the next thing for sure is a tablet edition. I'm looking at that now. I have a developer who's helping me port what I've built in Flash so that it runs better on iOS and Android. So I think that's going pretty smoothly, and for the first time in a while, that's getting done without a lot of effort required on my part, which is really nice. Steve Rishi is helping me out with that. What else? I have also been looking into prototyping my next game, which I would like to be I would like it to do for a 2D space simulation what Neo Scavenger did for post-apocalyptic survival. So by that I mean rigorous with its simulation of things like physics, the economy of space, survival mechanics within spacecraft, and a lot of it is going to be centered around actually building the spaceship, the sort of experience you would get building a spaceship out of Legos or in Kerbal or in even Prison Architect, the feeling of building a prison and then watching it go. So I'd like to kind of explore prototyping a game like that. And definitely I would like to do a Neo Scavenger sequel at some point. I should point out that the space game is actually meant to be also in the Neo Scavenger universe. I'd kind of like Neo Scavenger to be my playpen of games, so it's more of just a different style of game with the same setting. But a direct sequel, I think, will probably wait until the tablet edition's done, because I'll likely reuse the engine for that as PC in the future, because it'll be using what's called HAX. It's a multi-platform development language. So.
And what's the best way to contact you?
Oh, sorry. The best way is by email, usually, and that is dcfedor@bluebottlegames.com. But if you go to the website, bluebottlegames.com, there's a contact page there with both my email and my Twitter address. There's also forums there, which I try to check pretty regularly, but there's a lot more people on the forums than I can keep up with. So if you need to get in touch with me right away, email is probably the best.
That's cool. So thanks a lot, Daniel.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. It was great to talk to you. Some worthwhile experiences there. To have enough money to last 18 to 24 months to get the game working and revenue coming in.
Yep.
And applicable knowledge in the AAA industry as a producer that overlaps into indie, which makes sense, but at the same time, always worthwhile to know and have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I wish you well in your future endeavors on expanding the Neo Scavenger universe.
Thanks, and good luck to you too.
Thanks a lot. Stay tuned, Overload Nation. More videos to come. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev. If you are a game developer that wants to get your name and game out there and to share your experiences and stories, or you have feedback or opinions of the show, then contact me at info@gameoverload.co.uk. That's info@gameoverload.co.uk. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. More to come.